Let's talk about histograms. This is the key to a lot of luminosity adjustments inside of Photoshop, so I thought it would be important to quickly review this. I know that some of you have probably covered this already, some of you maybe not. What we have here is the snail from last week, a little black and white version of the snail from last week, and we're going to be going into a little demonstration that will be rated M for math, but don't worry, it's going to be pretty light in the math, so it shouldn't be too difficult. So let's talk about a histogram. If you've brought up image adjustments levels, and that's Control L on the keyboard, I'm sure you've seen this before. At the very least, last week I demonstrated this in one of the many videos that you all had to watch. And you've seen these things, and you know that moving these down makes it brighter, and moving this over makes it darker, and sliding this center one brings stuff up and down. But really, what is this, and what's this all referring to? Well, first off, the centerpiece is a histogram that relates to the luminosity values that are available. Essentially 0 to 255, where 0 is black, and then 255 is all on or all white. 128 is the middle point between 0 and 255, so that would be the Guéret point right here that you can swing it around and adjust. And we'll talk about all that in depth in just a minute. But it has this thing, right? And you've seen people kind of go, oh, well, what data are we getting rid of? What's going on here? Oh, let me clip in a little bit. What are they talking about? How are they reading this? Well, this piece is the histogram, and it's actually the same as the histogram window. If you bring it up under Window Histogram, this means it's cached, so I got to clear that to refresh it. You'll see essentially the layer that's selected. You can have it in like RGB mode and all this stuff. We'll talk about that more in a second. But it's the same thing. So what on earth is a histogram? Well, in this case, you remember on channels, we talked about this last week. The channels make up the luminosity value of the red, the green, and the blue projections inside your monitor. And from Colorful Notions, you'll remember that's how humans interpret color, which allows us to get away with just having 3 channels and having us see like a whole range of color. This case is black and white, so we're not seeing any color, but if we had like the little colorful snail, we'd interpret all of that and see what's going on. So what if you want to know, turn something on, what if you want to know how much black and how much white is really in an image, and how much gray is in it, and how many of which tones of gray and all that? Well, you probably have to collect all of that and then display it in some way. The way you probably display it is with like a bar chart, and if you've done anything with PowerPoint presentations or with Excel documents, you'd see, you know, the way to do little like, oh, hey, we've got this much of that and that much of this, and sales are up this quarter, and here's a pie chart and all that stuff. But those can be complicated things going on, and a histogram is actually a lot simpler than that. It's dealing with what's referred to as one-dimensional data. In other words, we have one measurement. So what sort of measurement are we looking for here? We're looking for a count of something. So in this case, if we brought up image adjustments levels again, down here at the black, we'd want to count how much of this is black. Up at the white, we want to count how much of this is white. Up at the gray, we want to count how much of this is gray. And so how many zeros are there in the image? And so if we were to sample this, we'd see the 0. We can literally do that by bringing up the appropriate window, which should be info. Notice we've got the RGB. The info window correlates with your eyedropper tool. Click on here. We can see that we're in RGB. We'll change to 255, 255, 255. And then this area, if I click in that black area, it will go down to, looks like 7's all down the line, 1's all down the line, so it's not quite black. Gray areas will get closer to 128. You can see those numbers flying around as I'm moving towards and away from middle gray areas into lighter gray areas. As it gets higher in value, or lower gray areas, you'll see it get lower in value. And also, if you look at the color over here, you'll see it swinging around as I sample. So info and color are tied with the eyedropper tool, which makes sense. You've used the eyedropper just like color before. Info is just a really handy dandy way of doing that. You can also use the eyedropper tool to put down points on things, which is kind of fun, and it will list what those points are in the info so you can get samples of stuff. We don't really need to do that right now. I just thought that's a pretty neat trick to bring up while I'm thinking of it. In any case, we have certain amounts of white, certain amounts of black, and certain amounts of gray, and we want to count those. Well, in our case, if we go to image adjustments levels, we'll just count them according to this grayscale bar down here. Because if a gradient grayscale from black to white, that's what I mean to say, from this grayscale, if it goes from black to white, we have 255 gradations going in. We have slightly less black, so it'd be 1. Slightly less white, so it'd be 254. Exactly in the middle, that would be 128, because that's between 0 and 255. It's just counting up and down. So let me give you a quick example of something else you might use it for, so we can try to put this all together. Someplace you might see histograms is in something like housing. If you're trying to figure out the cost of house inside an area. So you might have some house prices like 300,000, 350,000, 370,000, 400,000, maybe some 500,000 range houses. Well, you could go ahead and build a little chart. And at one point you'd have the frequency or the count going up and down, and then you have the amounts, these buckets going in. So you could set this up, for example, if you wanted all of this first bucket to be the 300,000, you'd count the 300,000. The second bucket, if you wanted that to be the 400,000 range, you'd count 400,000. If you want the final bucket to be the 500,000 range, you'd count the 500,000s. So in other words, this would be a 1, a 2, a 3. So you'd put this at 3. So you'd have a 1, 2, 3 here. This would be 1, 2, 3, 4. So you'd put this all the way up at 4, and this would be 1, 2. So you'd put this just at 2. Let me show you that data. Boom, exactly what I was talking about. So at the 300,000, count them, put it in. The 400,000, count them, put them in. The 500,000, count them, put them in. So that means that if we had something more complicated like a snail, and we were counting the number of times that black shows up that we have sampled using the eyedropper tool just to show where the closest blacks are in here, or the time that white has shown up, which is all this background, so it'll be a heck of a lot, or all the times that every single value of gray showed up, you would get something that looks like the histogram in the back of levels. In fact, you'd get exactly this. You would have a huge spike. I don't know if you can see this because it's so thin, it's just pure white, and then there's not a whole lot of white afterwards, so it drops off. There's a bunch of different grays, so they make up a huge amount, and so you can see that this kind of curves up. And a little spike in black because we got a couple little things right by the black. This is just counting it. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. How many pixels in this, what do we have here? Some massive number of pixels in here. If we go to image size, it's like 11 by 8 and it's 300 pixels. So you could do the math on that. It's counting out how many pixels here are actually present in this. And so it's like thousands of pixels, because it's 300 per inch and we have more than 10 inches, that's more than 3,000 pixels. Crazy, right? So that's all that is. And so if we were to bring up the histogram window, this can start to make a little more sense. So I clear that out. That icon will pop up on some things. It means that it's cached some stuff. It's not actually resampling it. It's one of the reasons I normally don't use the histogram unless I really want to pay attention to it, because it may not refresh on where you're going. So in this case, if we're looking at RGB or at colors, they'll be the same because there is no color in here. And it's the exact same thing as before, a huge spike on white, little spike on black, a whole bunch of grays. But if we were to activate our colorful snail layer and click on it and refresh this thing, since it doesn't sample it right, on RGB, it's the same sort of stuff, it's just smushing it down. Notice now there's no white background on this snail, so if I were to give it a white background, by merging down one, it does not want to merge down for some reason, so I'm just going to go into the flyout menu and I'm going to tell it to merge this layer down. It doesn't want to do that either, so I'll just right click on this. It really does not want to merge down. There we go. So now we've got it. Now this will look exactly the same as the snail in black and white, because this is just a smush of all the layers. But there's a really cool thing about histogram. You can switch it to color, and it will show you the histogram of each color overlapping each other. So here are the blues, here are the reds, and the greens are in here, but the greens only exist when there's also blue and red. And so it's turning into like these grays and these cyans and these yellows, because if you'll remember from the first class when I did those 3 dots of red, green, blue, we had the primaries and the secondaries and all of that good stuff. Same thing going on with the histogram. You can actually view how much of each color is available, how many pixels of this are actually showing up. which is absolutely amazing. So that will show up inside of your levels, and that will allow you to see what you're doing as you adjust it. So in the next video, let's go ahead and actually apply that and take a look at how the levels affects the data and the histogram.